Every single time your car changes gear without you touching a clutch pedal, you are using a piece of engineering that a Ferrari engineer invented in 1989 to save a few tenths of a second per lap. Not a version of it, not something inspired by it. The very same idea born on a Formula One car is now sitting quietly inside family hatchbacks, school-run SUVs, and the automatic that pulled you out of your driveway this morning. And here's the strange part. The people who built it didn't set out to make gear changes faster at all. That came later, almost by accident. What they were actually chasing was something that has nothing to do with speed and everything to do with the shape of the car. So, in the next few minutes, I want to answer 3 questions. 1. Why would a Formula One team spend a fortune to get rid of something as simple as a gear lever? 2. How does a modern gearbox change gear without ever cutting the power to the wheels, something that should be physically impossible? And 3. If this idea is so brilliant, how did the very same design end up ruining nearly 1.5 million ordinary cars and dragging a giant car maker into court? Stick around, because the answer connects a Grand Prix win in Brazil to a class action lawsuit through one small pair of paddles behind a steering wheel. Let's start with a problem that every car has had for over a century, and that most drivers never think about. Your engine likes to spin within a fairly narrow, happy range. Your wheels, don't they need to turn slowly when you pull away and very fast on the motorway? Gears are simply the translators between the two. First gear trades speed for muscle. Top gear trades muscle for speed. But here's the catch that the whole story hangs on. To swap from one gear to the next, you have to briefly disconnect the engine from the wheels. That's what the clutch does. And in that fraction of a second, while you're between gears, no power is reaching the road at all. The car is coasting, momentum only. Think of a tug of war. To grab further up the rope and get a better pull, you have to let go for just an instant. And in that instant, nobody is pulling. That gap, that little moment of nothing, is the enemy. Engineers even have a name for it, the torque interruption. Racing is, in large part, a war against that gap. Now, for most of motoring history, the driver managed that gap by hand and foot, left foot on the clutch, right hand on a lever, a little choreography repeated thousands of times a day. And in Formula One, right up to the late 1980s, it was exactly the same: a metal gear stick, an H-pattern gate, a clutch pedal. Drivers were wrestling a manual gearbox at 200 miles an hour. Enter a British engineer named John Barnard. Barnard had joined Ferrari from McLaren, and he'd been nursing an idea for years, ever since he designed a car that won the Indy 500 back in 1980. He wanted the gear stick gone. But, and this is the twist, the mythology usually skips, he didn't want it gone to shift faster. He wanted it gone because of aerodynamics. Here's why. That gear stick and the mechanical linkage running from it back to the gearbox forced the cockpit to be wide, and a wide car pushes more air. Barnard's obsession was a slimmer, sharper, more slippery car, and the fat gear stick sitting beside the driver was in the way. Get rid of the lever, and he could tuck the whole body in and carve that famously sharp nose. So the goal was a narrower car. The solution to that goal is what ended up in your driveway. And to build it, Barnard's team had to solve a chain of problems where every answer created the next one. That chain is where this gets clever. Problem 1. If the driver isn't going to move a lever, how does he tell the car to change gear? Barnard's answer was to replace the stick with 2 small paddles behind the steering wheel, one to go up, one to go down. Pull a paddle, and instead of a metal rod yanking the gearbox, an electro-hydraulic system does the work. The paddle is just a switch. The muscle is high-pressure fluid. And that idea wasn't plucked from nowhere. The aircraft industry had been using electro-hydraulic valves for years. Ferrari borrowed the principle and pointed it at a gearbox. The payoff was immediate for the car's shape. No lever in the cockpit, no clutch pedal linkage cluttering the footwell, a narrower monocoque, a cleaner nose. Exactly what Barnard wanted. But solving that opened a bigger question. If the driver only sends a signal, then something has to physically do the gear change, disengage the clutch, slide out of one gear, slide into the next, re-engage and do it faster and more precisely than any human foot and hand ever could. That's the job of the hydraulics and the electronics working together. Pull the paddle and in a blink the system pops the clutch, swaps the gear and re-engages, while the electronic brain refuses to let you drop into a gear so wrong it would over-rev and grenade the engine. The driver keeps both hands on the wheel and both eyes on the corner. When this reached the road years later, Ferrari would quote gear changes of around 150 milliseconds roughly, they said. The speed of a professional driver shifting at the absolute limit of his ability. Done automatically, every time, without fatigue. Brilliant. But if you've been paying attention, there's still a problem we haven't solved. Even with all this hydraulic wizardry, there is one clutch. And a single clutch still has to open and close to change gear. Which means, say it with me, there's still that gap, that torque interruption. That tug-of-war moment where nobody's pulling. To kill the gap completely, engineers needed a genuinely sneaky trick. And this is the heart of the whole video. Here's the leap. Instead of one clutch, use two, and split the gears between them. Picture two gearboxes squeezed into one case, sharing an output. One shaft carries the odd gears first, third, fifth, seventh. A second shaft, hollow, wrapped around the first, carries the even gears second, fourth, sixth. Each shaft has its own clutch. Now watch what that lets you do. You're driving along in third gear. Power is flowing through the odd shaft, odd clutch closed. But the gearbox already knows you'll probably want fourth next, so on the other shaft, quietly, it has already slotted fourth into place. Pre-selected, sitting there, waiting. So, when the moment to shift arrives, there's no sliding gears in and out anymore. The gearbox just does a handover. It opens the odd clutch and closes the even clutch at the exact same instant. One lets go as the other grabs. The engine never sees a break. The wheels never feel a gap. Go back to the tug-of-war. This time you've got two people on the rope. One is pulling, and the second already has a fresh grip higher up. On the signal, the first lets go the very instant, the second takes the strain. The rope never goes slack, nobody stops pulling. And it happens fast. We're talking gear changes of around 8 milliseconds at the sharp end. That's faster than you can blink. A blink takes something like 100 milliseconds, so the gearbox can shift well over 10 times before your eyelid has finished closing. This is the dual-clutch gearbox. You may have seen the badges. DSG on a Volkswagen, PDK on a Porsche, S-Tronic on an Audi. Same core idea. Two clutches, one pre-selecting while the other drives. That, finally, is how a car changes gear without ever cutting power to the wheels. But of course there's a but. This elegant machine has a hidden price. And it's the price that turned a racing triumph into a road car disaster. Here's the weakness. On a racetrack, you're rarely crawling. But on a road car, you sit in traffic, you creep, you pull away from lights over and over. And at very low speeds, a dual-clutch gearbox has a problem. A traditional automatic doesn't. To move off gently without stalling, one of those clutches has to slip grip partly. Not fully like riding a manual clutch at a hill start. Slip means friction. Friction means heat. And heat in a clutch means wear. The good engineers saw this coming. In higher performance cars, they bathe the clutches in oil, a wet clutch, so the oil carries the heat away, and those units can take enormous torque. In cheaper, more economy-minded cars, they use dry clutches with no oil bath, lighter, more efficient, less costly to build. And that single decision, wet versus dry, done well versus done cheaply, is the difference between the gearbox that won Grand Prix and the gearbox that ended up in a courtroom. Let me show you both. First, how it actually reached you. In Formula One, Barnard's system made its debut on the Ferrari 640 in 1989, and against the odds, it won its very first race, the Brazilian Grand Prix, with Nigel Mansell driving. It was desperately unreliable at first, mind you, but here's a lovely detail. The Gremlin wasn't really the clever gearbox at all. The electronics kept losing power because an alternator belt kept flinging itself off. Starve the system of electricity and it packs up. The gearbox itself was largely fine. Within a few seasons, everyone in Formula One had copied it, and then, in 1997, it made the jump to the road in the Ferrari F355 F1. That was the first road car in the world you could buy with paddles behind the wheel and no clutch pedal. Now, one honest bit of engineering detail, because this channel gets it right. That first road car, and those early F1 cars, were not dual clutch. They had a single clutch, just robotically operated and automated manual. Same paddles, same no-clutch pedal magic, but they still had that little torque gap. The true twin-clutch version, the one that closes the gap completely, only reached Ferrari's road cars in 2008. So the idea arrived first. The fully formed trick came later. Either way, the floodgates opened. Volkswagen, Porsche, Audi, Ford, within a decade, paddle shift and dual clutch gearboxes spread from million-pound exotica down to the family runabout. The racing solution had gone fully mainstream, which brings us to the disaster. Ford wanted the efficiency and the modern feel of a dual clutch gearbox in cheap, high-volume cars, the Fiesta and the Focus. They called it power shift. And to keep it cheap and economical, they went with dry clutches. Remember the hidden price? Heat. In stop-start traffic, those dry clutches overheated. And drivers reported exactly what you'd expect when clutches can't cope. Shuddering, juddering, hesitation, the car slipping, lurching, sometimes seeming to lose drive entirely, or creep forward when it shouldn't. This wasn't a handful of cars. In the United States alone, the class action settlement covered roughly 1.5 million vehicles, with close to 2 million people in the class. Ford paid tens of millions buying faulty cars back, over $47 million in repurchases by the end of 2019 alone. In Australia, the regulator hit Ford with a $10 million penalty for the way it treated customers, and internal documents suggested the company had known there were problems. Now sit with the irony for a second. The gearbox that won a Grand Prix on its debut and the gearbox that dragged Ford through the courts are the same fundamental invention. 2 clutches, pre-selection, electronic control. The physics didn't change. What changed was the execution, whether you spent the money to manage the heat or whether you cut the corner. Same genius, wildly different outcome. So where's it all going? Dual clutch gearboxes have grown to 8 speeds, lighter and slicker than ever, and they're now woven into hybrids in some Ferraris. The electric motor even handles reverse, so there's no reverse gear at all. But here's the twist to end on. After spending 35 years painstakingly deleting the clutch pedal and the gear stick, Ferrari has just in 2024 put them back, in a special model, as a kind of manual by wire. A clutch pedal and a lever that aren't even mechanically connected to anything. Pure nostalgia, engineered in software. Which is a perfect place to leave the real answer to our question. That thing you do without a second thought, flicking a paddle, or just letting the automatic get on with it, traces straight back to a British engineer at Ferrari who wanted a narrower car in 1989. He was chasing clean air over a racing chassis. He ended up changing how nearly every car on Earth shifts gear. The tenths of a second per lap? Those were real, eventually. But the F1 tech hiding in your gearbox was never really about the stopwatch. It was about a shape, a chain of clever problems, and one beautifully simple trick: pick the next gear before you ask for it. If you drive a paddle shift or a dual clutch car, tell me in the comments which badge is on yours. DSG, PDK, S-Tronic, Power Shift, something else. And here's the question I want to chew on next. If the manual gearbox is technically worse in every measurable way, why are engineers now paying to bring the feel of it back? That's the next video. Subscribe, and I'll see you there.